A single ship taught the galaxy how to be afraid. It was long, gray, and shaped like a blade. When its shadow crossed a world, that world already knew it had lost. This is the horrifying truth about Star Wars starships, and it starts with the machine that turned fear itself into a weapon, the Star Destroyer. In the opening scene of the original 1977 film, a small rebel corvette races across the screen while enemy fire chases it. Then something enormous slides in from above, and it keeps coming, and it does not stop. The Imperial Star Destroyer fills the frame because the ship is about a mile long. Canon reference works place the Imperial class at roughly 1,600 meters of gray metal, crewed by tens of thousands. That single shot told the audience everything it needed to know without one line of dialogue. In this galaxy, power has a shape, and everyone learns to recognize it. To understand why the design was so feared, it helps to know where it came from. During the Clone Wars, the Republic fought with an earlier warship called the Venator, a Star Destroyer built to carry hundreds of fighters into massive battles. When the Republic became the Empire, that design hardened into something colder. The graceful lines fell away, and what remained was the Imperial Star Destroyer, a pure instrument of control, produced in the thousands and posted across the galaxy. A Star Destroyer was never just one weapon. It was a fleet, an army, and an occupation force folded into a single hull. Consider everything one of them carried. Each ship held a full wing of 72 TIE fighters, ready to launch the moment a target appeared. Below its decks waited stormtroopers, walkers, and ground vehicles, enough to drop onto a planet and hold it by force. Long rows of turbo lasers lined the flanks, strong enough to cripple an enemy warship or open fire on the surface below. One vessel could seize a planet's skies, land an army, and crush any response, all without waiting for reinforcements. Because of this, a Star Destroyer in orbit did not visit a world, it took command of it. That was always the point. In canon, the Empire ruled through a simple and chilling idea, one often tied to Grand Moff Tarkin. Among its most senior commanders, fear of force would keep the galaxy in line, so the Empire would not have to use force everywhere at once. The Star Destroyer made that fear physical. A world that watched one settle overhead understood the price of rebellion long before a shot was fired. As a result, the ships did their deadliest work simply by existing. They were built to be seen and to be dreaded, and for a generation, it worked. People often name the Death Star as the Empire's true symbol of terror, and the battle station could indeed destroy an entire planet, but the Death Star was rare, and most citizens would never see one. The Star Destroyer was different, because it was everywhere. It was the face of the Empire that ordinary worlds actually met, the gray shape that could appear over any system on any morning. For most of the galaxy, that everyday presence was far more frightening than a superweapon they would never lay eyes on. Building a ship on this scale was itself a show of strength. In Canon and Legends alike, most of the Empire's Star Destroyers came from Kuat drive yards, an orbital shipbuilder whose construction rings could assemble warships faster than any rival. That industrial muscle changed how the Empire governed. A single Star Destroyer could blockade a world, choke off its trade, and enforce imperial law across an entire system without ever touching the ground. On many worlds, the real seat of government was not a building at all. It was a warship in orbit, close enough to reach the surface the moment anyone stepped out of line. When fear alone was not enough, the same ships could do something far worse. A Star Destroyer could aim its guns downward and scorch a planet from orbit, a tactic that reduced entire cities to ash. The threat was never a bluff, and the Empire proved more than once that it would spend a whole world to send a warning to the rest. Meanwhile, the machine that delivered that warning was itself a floating city, crewed by a small army of officers, gunners, and technicians who kept it running. And the standard Star Destroyer was only the starting point of what its masters were willing to build. There was a logic to all of this, and it was a frightening one. Fear does not hold steady on its own. To keep an entire galaxy in line, the threat has to keep growing, or people slowly stop believing in it. So the Empire kept building upward, past the standard Star Destroyer, towards something that made even those ships look small. Above the regular fleet sat exactly that. Darth Vader commanded a super Star Destroyer named the Executor, a vessel so vast it carried lesser Star Destroyers in its shadow. Canon sources place it at around 19,000 meters, more than than 10 times the length of the ships beneath it. A single executor did not reinforce a fleet. It was a fleet, a mobile fortress that could break a planet's defenses on its own. For the officers who served the Emperor, standing on that bridge meant standing close to the center of galactic power. Here, the real horror begins, and it has less to do with the machines than with the mind that ordered them. Every one of these ships was a decision. Someone chose to hold a galaxy together by making it afraid, then poured nearly limitless resources into the tools of that fear. The Emperor, Sheev Palpatine, understood this better than anyone alive. In public, he played a mild politician from the peaceful world of Naboo. In private, he was Darth Sidious, a Sith Lord and master of the dark side who had spent decades measuring exactly how much fear a galaxy could be made to carry. What everyone could see was never the whole plan. The Sith Lord hid warships the way other rulers hid credits. In canon, long after the Empire had fallen, a secret armada climbed out of the frozen world of Exegol. More than 1,000 Star Destroyers had been waiting there in the dark, and every one of them carried a weapon strong enough to destroy a planet by itself. This was the Final Order, assembled in total silence over decades by a cult that still served a dead emperor. The wider galaxy believed the fighting was long over. Beneath an endless storm at the edge of the map, the most dangerous fleet ever built sat almost ready to rise. The scale of it is frightening on its own. What makes it worse is how completely it stayed hidden. A ruler who already controlled the galaxy still built secret weapons, escape routes, and entire fleets that no official chart ever recorded, as if he never quite trusted the victory he had won. In the end, every warship in this galaxy is a kind of confession. It shows what its builders feared, what they wanted, and how far they would go to get it. And the Emperor's secrets did not start at Exegol. That habit ran through his entire reign, all the way back to the heart of the galaxy. The most complete example of it was not waiting at the edge of the map. It sat buried directly beneath his own capital, in the dark, secret from nearly everyone who served him. In the year 7 ABY, a New Republic general named Crix Medine watched something impossible climb out of the city of Coruscant. By that point, the ship had been buried on Coruscant for years, hidden through the latter part of the Galactic Civil War. None of his intelligence analysts, none of his spies, and none of his rebel scouts had ever placed it on a map. As the warship cleared the atmosphere, he said a single thing out loud. The ship had not come to fight, it was running. Even as the ruler of the galaxy, he had already prepared a way to escape. Across both canon and legends, the same pattern keeps surfacing. A ruler of the entire galaxy spent his reign building escape plans, hiding them from his closest subordinates, and placing them beneath his own throne. The ship under Coruscant was only the largest piece of evidence. Most of what is known about the Lusankya comes from Legends material, where its burial, its use as a prison, and its role as an escape plan are described in full. Canon sources confirm the ship's existence and its construction, but not the full scope of how it was used. Before the ground ever opened, what the Empire was burying was already a secret. The records hid one ship, the capital hid another. The Legends reference book, The Essential Guide to Warfare, documents how the Navy had long treated the Super Star Destroyer as a second-tier project, a prestige concession that the service accepted as a lesser evil once the Death Star overshadowed naval priorities. That standing reversed overnight at Yavin. When Rebel pilots destroyed the battle station, the giant warships the Empire had treated as backdrop became the main program. What looked from the outside like a panicked response had started long before the panic. Legends reference material identifies the Kuat-built ship's internal name during construction. It was called Executor 2. In Imperial records, there was only ever one Super Star Destroyer in progress, and that ship was Vader's public flagship at Fondor. The second ship did not exist on paper. By listing all of the Lusankya's costs as part of the Executor's construction, the Empire kept the second hull's existence a secret from the galaxy. The cover story did its work. Outside observers, including Rebel intelligence and rival Imperial power centers, never learned that a second hull existed. Years later, New Republic analyst Winter would confirm the trick in a briefing to Rogue Squadron. Both shipyards had insisted they alone built the Executor. Neither was lying. The two warships were identical by design, and only the Fondor ship ever joined the public fleet. The other, wherever it was, had a different destination. That destination was not a shipyard, not a port, and not even orbit. Before that reveal, the pattern deserves context, because the Lusankya was not the first thing Palpatine hid using this method. The novel Catalyst documents the same deception running across the Death Star itself. The superweapon had been hidden behind a public program called Project Celestial Power, presented to the galaxy as a clean energy effort. Components were built under fake names like Stellar Sphere, Mark Omega, and Pax Aurora. Whole teams of scientists worked inside what the same storyline calls fake divisions, never told what their research actually built. The canon novel Tarkin extends the rule further. No base commander, no Moff, no admiral, and no general was ever given full access to information on the Death Star shipments, timelines, or building progress. The book reveals that the Emperor was the only person who knew the complete story of the project. A ruler that was determined to control information was a ruler determined never to lose control of his own escape, and that rule, applied to a warship, is how a secret this size stays buried. The same novel shows one more detail that matters for what comes next. During the construction of the military intelligence complex on Coruscant, Palpatine ordered tiny hidden cameras installed in every corner of the building, so he could watch and listen to his own spy masters at any hour. The ruler of the galaxy did not trust even the people he had chosen to run his secret service. Surveillance was only one half of the habit. The other half was preparing for the day he might need to disappear from his own throne. The same mindset, taken further, produced something much larger. The Emperor's next move was to bury a super star destroyer beneath Coruscant's cityscape, on the later site linked to Armand Izard's old underground headquarters. The reference book, The Essential Guide to Warfare, reveals something that most fans do not know. The name Lusankia had existed long before the ship did. It was originally a forgotten district of Galactic City on Coruscant, a part of the capital that had been buried under later construction and turned into a hidden prison by the Senate Bureau of Intelligence. The director of that agency was a man named Armand Izard, whose daughter Isan grew up inside the buried facility. So when Palpatine buried the Super Star Destroyer, he did not choose a random spot. He placed it directly on top of a site that had already been used to hide things beneath the capital. The warship inherited the name of the district above it and the tradition of secrecy that came with it. The city itself was rebuilt on top of the ship. Starships of the Galaxy gives the cleanest version of the burial. The finished warship was wrapped in a massive outer frame of beams and electronics. That shell was designed to make the Lusankia look, from the outside, like a giant planetary shield generator. Beneath it sat a second structure, a huge six-sided platform made of thousands of repulsor lift cells stitched together. The whole disguised package was then lowered onto the surface and sealed into the planet. The Legends novel Wedge's Gamble confirms the general mechanism. Giant Imperial construction droids routinely tore down and rebuilt Coruscant's cityscape, large enough to reshape whole districts as part of the capital's ongoing construction cycle. The tools for hiding something under the surface were already in regular use above it. In the Krytos Trap, New Republic General Aaron Kraken adds the missing piece. The rebellion, he explains, had earlier traced enormous Imperial procurement of repulsor lift components, but had never been able to pin down where the shipments were going. After the launch, the answer was clear. Those parts had gone into the ship's lifting cradle. Droids erased a district and rebuilt a new one on top of the hidden warship. From street level, nothing looked unusual. The mechanical part, however, was solvable. The part no one has ever fully explained is how the Emperor kept every witness quiet. Thousands of workers, engineers, and pilots saw the burial happen. Any one of them could have spoken. The most direct statement on record comes from the one person Palpatine eventually trusted with the ship, and even she could not solve the mystery. The book Izard's Revenge records it in her own words. Ivan Izard, the Emperor's director of Imperial Intelligence, described the burial as a mystery she never cracked. She knew where and when the Lusankia had been created, and she knew the date it was given to her. As head of Imperial Intelligence, however, she could find no clue as to how the warship had been placed into the planet. Her best guess involved the Force, a power she did not understand and could not use. The Sith Lord, she said, may have pulled the warship down and buried it directly through the dark side itself, or he may have reached out with his mind and blocked anyone from noticing the descent as it happened. She could not rule either idea out. In the same storyline, Wedge Antilles reached a darker answer. If Palpatine had not used the Force to wipe the memories of every witness, then the likely alternative was that the Emperor had ordered the deaths of every person who saw the ship go into the ground. Either way, the secret held. The same ruler who wired his own spy agency with surveillance during its construction was not a ruler who left a burial operation to chance. One way or another, the witnesses stopped being a problem, and there is a troubling match for exactly that kind of behavior. The novel Tarkin describes another hidden project directly under the Imperial Palace on Coruscant, an ancient Sith hideout dug out in total secrecy. The excavation and restoration were carried out by machines, watched over by a single droid. No living person other than Sidious himself ever walked inside. Vader did not know the chamber existed. The pattern is the same. The scale is what differs. Once the warship was in the ground, it was given over. Izard's Revenge records the handover. The Emperor took his stand there alone, through one of what the book calls his hidden sanctums and side palaces scattered across Coruscant. Palpatine gave her privileged access to the buried warship and had her private quarters finished in fine, rare woods chosen to please her. The ship's handover was treated as a singular act of trust given to the one person the Emperor kept closest to the operation. The same novel gives a clean date for the handover. The Sith Lord told her its location at roughly the same time its sister ship, the Executor, entered service. The handover happened in parallel with the public flagship's commissioning, not after it. The two ships, and the two men who would command them in the Emperor's name, rose together. Why this woman? That question has a complicated answer, and it is the first hint of what Palpatine actually planned to use the Lusankya for. Her background is laid out in the Bacta War. Ysanne Izard took her father's job after selling him out as a suspected supporter of the rebellion. She turned her own father in, took his position as Director of Imperial Intelligence, and served the Emperor from the top of his own spy agency. Rumors inside the Empire also held that she had once been one of Palpatine's lovers, a claim the novel records as part of her reputation. What the sources confirm is the betrayal. The woman Palpatine chose as custodian of the Lusankya had risen through her own family treachery, and the Emperor placed a hidden warship in her hands anyway, which matches what the ship became. Under the Director, the Lusankya turned into something else entirely. In the Kratos Trap, General Kraken describes the program. People who came out of the buried warship had been brainwashed into Imperial operatives who would turn on their own friends, family, and commanders when Izard activated them. Prisoners were given code markings. Rogue Squadron pilots Koran Horn and Tycho Selchu were both labeled C status R1, meaning resistant in the early phase. Each pilot had been run through simulator flights designed to get them to fire on rebel symbols. Both refused. The Empire marked them as failures and kept them locked up anyway. A prison this elaborate, inside a warship this size, was never really built for the prisoners. It was built for the man who owned it. The prisoners believed they were deep underground in some distant backwater world. The inside of the warship had been built to match that lie in every detail. The novel describes the prison block as made to look ground and drilled out of solid rock, with thick dust, uneven rock walls, and worn tools that convinced captives the place had been built before the Clone Wars. Inmates worked fake shifts with sledgehammers inside a staged gravel mine. Elsewhere in the same facility, on the route Koran Horn later used to escape, a 10-foot hologram of the Emperor stood in another chamber, placed to block the exact spot of a hidden escape lift. The lie about where the prisoners were standing was not for them, it was for the day a real escape plan needed every secret around it to hold. The prison took people the galaxy thought were already dead. Jan Dodona, the rebel general who had planned the Death Star attack at Yavin, sat inside that complex for 7 years. The galaxy believed he had died during the evacuation of Yavin 4. He was alive the entire time, locked up under the Capitol. As detailed in the same book, Derek Waziri, husband of New Republic intelligence officer Yella Waziri, was broken inside the facility and turned into a sleeper killer who did not remember his time there at all. What Izard did to the mine, however, was only the half of it the prisoners could see. Another inmate carried a secret as killers built into his own body. Erlor Sete had a hidden device sewn inside him. When Koran Horn identified him by name at a later Rogue Squadron gathering, the implant recognized Koran's stored voice print and activated. Blood poured from his eyes and nose. His bones snapped under their own weight, and he died on the spot. The Empire had built remote kill switches into the bodies of its own prisoners so that no escaped agent would ever live long enough to tell the story. Koran summed it up in one line. People who came out of there, he said, were human remote weapons. They did terrible things when the Empire switched them on, none of which made sense as the work of a prison. It made perfect sense as the work of a contingency kept alive in case the man who built it ever needed deniable agents in a galaxy that had stopped recognizing his rule. When Koran himself was finally captured, Izard called the Lusankya her private workshop for people like him. He became the first prisoner ever to escape, a feat the novel calls never before successfully accomplished. When he worked his way out of the fake mine and looked back, he discovered something that changed what the Lusankya had really been. The bulkhead doors he had assumed were pulled from wrecked ships were actually part of a ship. The prisoners had been living packed inside the lower part of an Imperial Super Star Destroyer dressed up to look like a hole in the ground, which left the question that the buried warship had been quietly raising the whole time. The cells were elaborate. The ship around them was overkill. The handful of cells that held Dodona, Tycho, and Koran could have fit inside a bunker a tiny fraction of the ship's size. A prison does not need hyperdrives, a crew of over 250,000, or a full stormtrooper force, so that was what the rest of the Lusankya was for. The Legends novel, The Back to War, answers it in a single line from Winter's briefing. The Lusankya had been buried on Coruscant, in her words, probably to serve as the Emperor's getaway ship. This was the same conclusion General Medine reached watching the launch above Coruscant, a ship heading out, not digging in, escape, not conquest. Starships of the Galaxy pushes the answer further. The book describes the Lusankya as fully equipped to smash through a planet's defenses by itself and take control of its major cities. Unlike other Super Star Destroyers, which needed support fleets, it was, on its own, enough to build a new small multi-planet government. The design proves it. The Lusankya had fewer heavy guns than a standard executor class, trading firepower for more troop space, better computers, and room for prisoners. Taken together, the sources make the Lusankya read less like a warship and more like a mobile seat of power. If the capital ever fell, Palpatine could board, launch, seize a new world, and rebuild his rule from the hull outward. He would arrive with his own stormtrooper force, his own command staff, and his own prisoners for interrogation. One ship would carry the operational backbone of a surviving empire. The novel Lords of the Sith shows the same habit on a smaller scale. When a rebel sabotage attempt threatened a Star Destroyer the Emperor was aboard, Sidious calmly told Vader he had a second escape shuttle ready in a different hangar and had not bothered to mention it. Vader had not known about the backup shuttle, but he was not surprised. His master prepared for almost every outcome. The Lusankya is the same instinct, scaled up to the size of a capital ship. The technical breakdown in Starships of the Galaxy confirms the design with hard numbers. The Lusankya carried 207,381 crew, 57,000 troops, and could hold 115,000 prisoners. It launched 72 starfighters along with up to 1,000 smaller craft for landing. Winter, in her briefing, had already made the scale clear in human terms. The crew alone was equal to 25 times the population of Thyfera, a small nation living inside a single warship, all of them kept secret. In an unsettling detail, the reference book adds that the Lusankya actually required fewer crew than a standard Super Star Destroyer because it ran better computers. Those computers had been, in the book's own words, constantly receiving upgrades while hidden within Coruscant. Being buried had made the ship smarter. Palpatine never got to use it. The Emperor died over Endor in 4 ABY before the capital was ever attacked. The warship stayed on the ground, still waiting. The only person who knew where to find it was still alive. For 3 years, Izard kept the Lusankya safe as the Empire came apart. The Essential Guide to Warfare describes her rise during this time. By 5 ABY, with rival warlords fighting each other across the galaxy, she had become the real ruler of what was left of the New Order, with a permanent guard of Imperial Royal Guards. Meanwhile, the New Republic was closing in on Coruscant. In 7 ABY, with rebel forces inside the city, she did exactly what Palpatine had designed the ship to do. Wedge's Gamble lays out her preparation in her own words. She would move herself, she told her second-in-command Kirtan Lu, to her Lusankya facility, where she had the seeds of the rebellion's destruction that needed time to grow. Above ground, she left a sleeper terror network called the Palpatine Counterinsurgency Front. Below ground, she started the engines of the buried warship. The launch is described in order in the Krytos trap. Green turbo laser fire broke through the ferrocrete shell the ship had been sealed inside. The 6-sided repulsor lift cradle switched on, and the whole structure lifted free of the planet. Thrusters ignited, burning away even more of the cityscape above. More than 100 square kilometers of Coruscant's surface was erased in the launch itself, with millions of residents left missing and presumed dead. The warship broke through Coruscant's 2 planetary shields, traded fire briefly with an orbital Golan defense platform, jettisoned the 6-sided cradle that had held it underground, and jumped to hyperspace toward Thyfera, the back-to-producing planet whose medical monopoly would let Izard do exactly what Palpatine's blueprint prescribed: set up a new capital, seize a resource the galaxy could not live without, rule from a ship. Which means the one person who actually used the Lusankya the way Palpatine built it to be used was not Palpatine. It was the woman he had handed it to. She executed this plan in 7 ABY. The only difference was that the capital she chose to relocate to was not hers to keep. Rogue Squadron ran her down at Thyfera. Captain Joke Drizzo ordered the warship to ram Thyfera rather than surrender, but the bridge command shifted to acting Captain Warowin before that could happen. Warowin surrendered the ship to the New Republic. Izard's revenge later shows Isan's own end. Years after the Back to War, Izard resurfaced and attempted to seize the rebuilt Lusankya during a period of imperial political collapse. She boarded the warship warship, was cornered inside her own former quarters and was shot dead by New Republic officer Yella Wasiri. The architect of the brainwashing program died inside the prison she had built. The ship her father's buried facility had inspired, the prison she had used to break others, the escape plan she had executed for a dead emperor. All of it ended with her body inside the same hull. The ship remained in New Republic hands for roughly 2 decades, passing through the refit, storage, and active service. The Legends comic series Crimson Empire, set 7 years after Endor, depicts the ongoing Imperial collapse during this period, with surviving warlords fighting each other while the Lusankya begins its new life under Rebel command. Later reference material, including the Essential Guide to Warfare, makes clear that other Executor-class vessels surfaced in Imperial hands during this period, and the New Republic eventually refitted the Lusankya for combat because it could not rule out meeting other super heavy threats in the fragmented empire. Wedge Antilles eventually used the Lusankya himself at the Battle of Borleas in 28 ABY, in an operation he called Emperor's Hammer. He turned the ship's guns on a Yuuzhan Vong invasion force and unleashed the kind of single-handed orbital bombardment Palpatine had designed the warship to deliver. The narration in the novel Rebel Dream, written from the view of pilot Jaina Solo, caused the long arc in a single line. The Lusankya, the book states, was finally carrying out the purpose for which she had been built, before Jaina had even been born. The ship's story ended there. The pattern it belonged to did not. The Essential Guide to Warfare includes a passage worth remembering. The 4 super Star Destroyers the galaxy knew about publicly were the Executor, the Aggressor, the Brawl, and the Reaper. 4 ships, 4 flagships. Inside New Republic intelligence files, however, the true estimates ran much higher. More than 20, the source states, were thought to have been built. An exact count, in the tech's own words, proved nearly impossible to track for Rebel investigators. Palpatine had ordered some of them built outside the records, kept in reserve at secret Imperial bases, sent into the unknown regions, or hidden for what the work calls the Emperor's own dark purposes. The Lusankya is named as the known example, the rest were never accounted for. The Lusankya was the one buried weapon the galaxy dug up. Of the more than 20 legends suggest were built, the others vanish into the records, and some may never have existed at all. A ruler who controlled the entire galaxy spent his reign hiding escape craft from his own apprentice, wiring cameras into his own spy agency, and parking a warship under his own capital in case any of it ever failed him, which is the question the ship leaves behind. The man who engineered the fall of the Republic, who survived 1,000 years of Sith planning, who ruled every world worth ruling, never stopped preparing to run. From what? The rebellion he was already grinding down, a successor he had personally chosen and broken, a galaxy that, by every visible measure, was already his. The buried warship answers in the only way a Sith Lord never says aloud. He did not believe in his own victory. The man who controlled everything spent his reign planning to escape from it because somewhere underneath the throne, and the apprentice, and the title, he expected the whole structure to come apart. The Lusankya was not a contingency for his enemies, it was a contingency for the day he stopped trusting his own grip on the galaxy he had already won. For all his fear, the Emperor was right about one thing. His rule did come apart. It did not fall to a bigger warship or a hidden fleet, but to a cheap little fighter his own officers barely respected. That fighter was small, mass-produced, and flown by pilots the Sith Lord had dismissed as no real threat. The X-Wing Starfighter became one of the Rebel Alliance's most effective combat platforms during the Galactic Civil War. Examining canon sources reveals how specific engineering choices created a balanced starfighter. Decisions in armament, shielding, propulsion, and hyperspace capability allowed the craft to operate independently across strategic and tactical roles. From Yavin to Endor, these design decisions shaped battle outcomes and served as a frontline workhorse through multiple major engagements. Chapter 1: Multi-Role Solution. The Rebel Alliance faced a challenge that conventional military thinking struggled to solve. Imperial doctrine relied on specialized fighters supported by massive capital ships and infrastructure. TIE formations often attacked in numbers, starfighters that excelled in swarms but lacked shields and hyperdrives. TIE bombers carried ordnance in dedicated payload bays, while Star Destroyers provided both firepower and endurance at the cost of enormous resources and crew. The Alliance possessed none of these advantages and operated under completely different constraints. Operating from hidden bases, scattered across the galaxy, Rebel commanders needed a single platform capable of fulfilling roles that traditionally required multiple specialized craft. The T-65B X-Wing starfighter emerged as the solution to this strategic problem. Incom Corporation's design integrated 4 wing-mounted laser cannons and proton torpedo capability. The distinctive S-foil configuration became visible in every major engagement. This armament layout allowed the X-Wing to engage both enemy fighters in dogfights and larger targets like capital ships or fortified installations. The proton torpedo system proved particularly valuable. These energy missiles carried enough explosive power to damage or destroy targets far beyond what laser cannons could achieve. Imperial capital ships, space stations, and hardened ground installations all fell within the X-Wing's strike envelope. The Rebel Starfighter's owner's workshop manual documents how Incom's engineers prioritize reliability alongside adaptability. The X-Wing's modular construction and robust components allowed field repairs under difficult circumstances. This practical durability extended the fighter's operational lifespan and maintained squadron strength even when supply lines stretched thin across the galaxy. Shield generators and hyperdrive capability completed the multi-role package. Most Imperial fighters sacrificed defensive systems for raw speed and numbers. TIE pilots relied on evasion and overwhelming force rather than protection. Deflector shields gave Rebel pilots survival chances that raw maneuverability alone cannot provide. Meanwhile, the integrated hyperdrive eliminated dependence on carrier vessels, allowing independent operations across vast distances without support infrastructure. Chapter 2: Structural Engineering and Durability. Imperial starfighter doctrines sacrifice pilot protection for a numerical advantage and cost efficiency. Combat engagements showed how TIE fighters lacked deflector shields entirely, relying instead on agility and overwhelming numbers to achieve objectives. Pilots who survived their first missions learned to trust evasion over protection. Those who failed to evade became casualties that Imperial planners replaced from endless training academies, a system built on accepting high-risk flying conditions. The Rebel Alliance could not afford such losses. Every pilot represented months of training, irreplaceable combat experience, and scarce resources invested in their development. Losing veteran pilots meant erasing tactical knowledge that could not be recovered. The workshop manual details how the X-Wing's deflector shield system addressed the survival problem directly. The shields absorbed energy weapon hits and dispersed kinetic impacts that would have destroyed unprotected craft. The workshop manual describes the S-foils as distributing deflector shield energy and balancing power flow between systems. This design gave pilots tactical flexibility in managing the craft's protective and offensive capabilities during combat. This adaptability extended beyond shields to the fundamental airframe construction. The X-Wing mounted 4 fusible thrust engines in a distinctive S-foil layout. The closed wing position creates an aerodynamic profile suitable for atmospheric flight. When opened into attack position, the S-foils distribute deflector shield energy and serve as stabilizer surfaces. This arrangement gave pilots precise control during combat maneuvers while maintaining structural integrity under stress. The 4-engine layout provided redundancy that single-engine designs could not match. Damage to one engine degraded performance, but did not cripple the craft entirely, allowing pilots to compensate by adjusting power distribution to the remaining engines and still reach safe territory. Hull construction reinforced this survivability philosophy. The space frame featured robust engineering that withstood weapon impacts and structural loads capable of tearing apart lighter craft. Rebel mechanics appreciated the design when conducting field repairs. Battle-damaged X-Wings often returned to service using improvised parts and basic tools, while more delicate starfighters required specialized facilities and components that Rebel bases rarely possessed. The landing gear and life support systems reflected similar engineering priorities. Retractable struts allowed operations from rough terrain and improvised landing strips, while life support systems provided pilots with survival chances even after damage. These features assume pilots would face situations where the craft failed, but the pilot might still be recovered. Combat survivability shaped every engineering decision. Chapter 3: Offensive systems. The X-Wing's 4 laser cannons mounted at the wingtips in the S-foil layout serve purposes beyond simple redundancy. This placement creates overlapping fields of fire that cover nearly every approach angle. Enemy fighters attempting to evade could not simply drop below or climb above the line of fire. Pilots could track targets through 3-dimensional maneuvers without losing weapon coverage. Traditional dogfighting tactics assume fighters carried forward-firing weapons, requiring precise alignment with targets. Pilots trained to position their entire craft to bring guns on target, a technique that consumed time and energy in every engagement. This weapon spread reduced the precision requirement. Combat sequences demonstrate pilots maintaining fire on targets while executing evasive maneuvers simultaneously. The cannons could be fired individually or in concert, depending on tactical requirement, allowing pilots to adjust firing patterns based on the target type, range, and available reactor output. This flexibility meant the same weapon system adapted to different tactical situations without requiring different ammunition or hardware changes. Laser cannons alone could not engage every target the Alliance needed to destroy. Imperial capital ships mounted armor too thick for fighter-grade lasers to penetrate effectively, while space stations, shield generators, and fortified ground installations similarly resisted conventional fighter weapons. Traditional military doctrine assigned such targets to bomber craft carrying heavy ordnance. The separation of roles meant coordinating multiple craft types for complex strikes. The X-Wing's proton torpedo launchers eliminated this coordination requirement. Each launcher held a magazine of high-yield torpedoes capable of penetrating heavy armor and shields. At Yavin, a single 2-torpedo salvo destroyed a battle station the size of a small moon. No amount of laser fire could scratch such a target, while the torpedoes allowed pilots to break off attack runs immediately rather than maintaining vulnerable approach vectors. The combination of cannons and torpedoes meant a single X-Wing could engage fighters, escort craft, patrol vessels, and capital ships within the same sortie. Rebel commanders exploited this versatility by conducting fighter sweeps to clear resistance, then immediately transitioning to strike runs against capital ships or ground targets. These same craft that escorted transports could divert to intercept Imperial patrols or attack opportunity targets. No other starfighter matched this operational range within a single airframe. The weapons also complemented each other tactically. Laser cannons suppressed enemy defenses, while torpedoes approached their targets. The continuous laser fire forced enemy gunners and fighter escorts to evade rather than coordinate defensive responses. So by the time defensive fire organized itself, the torpedoes had already committed to terminal attack runs. This suppression and strike combination amplified effectiveness beyond what either weapon system achieved independently. This tactical synergy proved especially valuable during capital ship assaults. X-Wings approached Star Destroyers while laying down suppressive cannon fire against turboblaster batteries and TIE fighter launch bays. The defensive fire created windows of opportunity for torpedo runs against shield generators, engine sections, or bridge structures. Single X-Wings executing these combined attacks accomplished missions that would have required coordinated bomber and fighter elements in traditional operations. Ammunition management created strategic considerations that affected mission planning. Laser cannons drew power from the main reactor, providing effectively unlimited ammunition as long as the reactor functioned, while proton torpedoes existed as finite resources that could not be replenished without returning to base. Pilots had to judge when situations justified expending torpedoes versus when laser cannons sufficed. This decision-making added tactical depth to engagements and separated skilled pilots from novices. Chapter 4: The X-Wing in Cannon Battles. The Battle of Yavin provided the first major test of the X-Wing's combat effectiveness against Imperial forces. Rebel commanders committed their starfighter squadrons to an assault on the Death Star, a battle station protected by turbolaser batteries, TIE fighter squadrons, and Darth Vader himself. The mission required precision flying through a trench system while under continuous fire, culminating in a torpedo strike against a thermal exhaust port. Red Squadron and Gold Squadron navigated through overlapping defensive fire from the station's surface guns. The deflector shields absorbed hits that would have destroyed TIE fighters instantly. Rebel pilots maintained formation despite casualties and continued their attack runs when other craft might have broken off. Maneuverability allowed them to dodge defensive fire while maintaining their approach vectors toward the target trench. During the trench run itself, the X-Wing's capabilities became fully apparent. Luke Skywalker piloted Red 5 through the narrow confines, while TIE fighters pursued from behind. The craft's speed, shield protection, and structural integrity kept him alive long enough to reach the firing position. The proton torpedo launch that destroyed the Death Star validated every engineering choice made during development. A single starfighter accomplished what an entire fleet cannot achieve through conventional assault. The Battle of Hoth showcased different aspects of X-Wing performance. As Imperial forces closed on Echo Base, X-Wing squadrons prepared to support the evacuation. Rebel transports required a fighter escort to break through the Imperial blockade. The Battle of Endor demonstrated X-Wing performance at fleet scale. Rebel squadrons engaged the Imperial fleet directly while supporting capital ship operations. X-Wings conducted fighter sweeps against TIE interceptors, escorted bombers attacking Star Destroyers, and provided close support for the Millennium Falcon's run against the Death Star's reactor core. The craft performed every role simultaneously across different parts of the battlefield. Wedge Antilles and other veterans exploited these capabilities against increasingly skilled Imperial opposition. Chapter 5 Strategic Value and Flexibility. Most starfighters in the Galactic Civil War depended on carrier vessels for deployment beyond local operations. TIE fighters launched from Star Destroyers or planetary bases within their combat radius. Y-Wing bombers required support ships to position them for strike missions, and A-Wings operated as interceptors tied to fleet movements. These limitations meant starfighter operations remained subordinate to capital ship positioning and logistics chains. The X-Wing's hyperdrive eliminated this dependency entirely. A single X-Wing could jump independently to any location without requiring a carrier vessel, support fleet, or forward base. Luke's solo journey from Hoth to Dagobah aboard his X-Wing demonstrated this independent hyperspace capability. Rebel commanders could dispatch X-Wings on deep strike missions behind Imperial lines, conduct reconnaissance across multiple sectors simultaneously, or reinforce threatened positions without moving capital ships into danger. A dozen X-Wings based on a remote moon could threaten Imperial assets across an entire sector. The Empire had to defend countless targets against political raids because X-Wing squadrons could appear anywhere without warning. The reduction in specialized craft requirements delivered additional advantages. Traditional military forces fielded separate squadrons for air superiority, ground attack, torpedo bombing, reconnaissance, and escort duties. Each specialization required unique training pipelines, maintenance facilities, and logistics chains. Versatility meant the Alliance could maintain effective combat power with fewer total craft types. This simplification reduced the support infrastructure burden and made every base capable of supporting frontline operations. Chapter 6 The Genius of Balance. The X-Wing's success during the Galactic Civil War established design principles that influenced starfighter development for years. Military planners studied how a single craft type had enabled an outnumbered force to challenge an empire. The lessons learned from X-Wing operations shaped procurement decisions and tactical doctrine. These influences extended beyond the Rebellion's victory at Endor. The New Republic continued operating X-Wing squadrons after the Empire's defeat. According to canon sources, the X-Wing remained in frontline service for years following the Battle of Endor. The New Republic maintained production as threats evolved. This operational longevity demonstrated that the original design's balance remained relevant across changing strategic environments. Craft optimized for specific mission profiles became obsolete as circumstances shifted, but the X-Wing's versatility allowed it to adapt through upgrades rather than replacement. The Empire itself acknowledged this approach through its own development programs. Imperial designers pursued more advanced TIE variants during the war, recognizing that shields and hyperdrives multiplied effectiveness. The TIE Defender emerged as an experimental fighter equipped with both deflector shields and hyperdrive capability. This represented a fundamental shift from Imperial doctrine that had previously prioritized cost efficiency and numerical advantage. The TIE Defector incorporated capabilities that address Rebel starfighter advantages. Shields protected pilots, hyperdrives enabled independent deployment, and multi-role weapons allowed engagement across target types. The Empire's willingness to abandon its specialized craft approach demonstrated how thoroughly Rebel combat performance had reshaped strategic thinking. Tactical innovations developed by X-Wing pilots became formalized procedures. The practice of adjusting power distribution between shields and engines during combat spread throughout fighter communities. Exploiting hyperdrive independence for rapid deployment became standard operational doctrine. What had begun as field-expedient adaptations by Rebel pilots evolved into techniques taught at military academies. The craft validated an approach to starfighter design that prioritized adaptability over maximizing single attributes. Imperial Star Destroyers carried overwhelming firepower, while TIE Fighters achieved numerical superiority through cost efficiency. The X-Wing succeeded by balancing multiple capabilities into one platform that could operate independently across every mission profile the war demanded. The 4 laser cannons and proton torpedo launchers provided firepower against both fighters and capital ships. The deflector shields and robust construction kept pilots alive through sustained combat. The 4-engine layout delivered maneuverability with redundancy against battle damage. The hyperdrive eliminated dependence on carriers and projected power across the galaxy. Each system worked together to create a platform where versatility multiplied effectiveness rather than diluting it. From Yavin to Endor, these design choices shaped battle outcomes. They proved that balanced capability could overcome specialized superiority when strategic circumstances demanded adaptation. The proof lay not in theoretical specifications, but in combat results that transformed an outnumbered rebellion into a force capable of challenging an empire. The X-Wing starfighter succeeded because its engineers understood the truth about warfare. No single advantage matters if you cannot survive to use it, reach the battlefield to apply it, or adapt when circumstances change. The craft's genius was not in revolutionary technology, but in ruthlessly practical integration. Every system served multiple purposes. Every capability reinforced another. The result was a starfighter that could operate independently, survive sustained combat, and accomplish any mission the war demanded. That philosophy endures. The distinctive silhouette flying through battle became more than a symbol of rebellion. It became proof that balanced capability, properly integrated, creates advantages that specialization cannot match. Military forces across the galaxy learned that lesson. The X-Wing did not just help win a war, it changed how wars would be fought. The X-Wing was built to fight, and it was very good at it. Not every famous starfighter shared that purpose. One of the most beautiful ships in the galaxy was never meant for war at all. It was built for a peaceful world that kept almost no military, designed for ceremony and escort rather than combat. A 9-year-old boy with no formal starfighter training flew a Naboo N1 into the belly of a Trade Federation battleship and blew it apart from the inside. That single moment in The Phantom Menace turned the N1 into a legend, and it is also the reason almost everyone misunderstands the ship. For over 25 years, fans have judged the N1 by that miraculous moment, treating it as either a surprisingly capable frontline fighter or a beautiful design held back by strange flaws. It had no conventional landing gear or standard astromech socket, and a tail fin that plugs into the palace walls, so the throne itself can upload mission orders directly into the fighter's computer. None of it makes sense for a typical starfighter, and there is a reason for that, one that changes everything about how this ship was meant to be understood. To piece this together, we dug through both Canon and Legends material. From the films and official reference books to the Johnston novels, the Shattered Empire comics and the designers who shaped the N1 with their own hands. The story starts not with the ship, but with the world that built it. Chapter 1: Built for a Throne. Naboo had no army, and that was not an accident. It was a mid-rim world governed by an elected monarchy, a wealthy and culturally proud society that valued art, education, and environmental care far above military strength. The entire defense structure of the planet, the Royal Naboo Security Forces, served not as a standing military, but as a volunteer security organization. Its members were peacekeepers first and defenders second, all under the command of Captain Quarsh Panaka during the era most central to the N1 story. In Legends continuity, the Space Fighter Corps was formed by King Ars Varuna, Padme Amidala's predecessor, specifically to gain leverage in dealings with the Trade Federation. He did not create the Corps because Naboo faced an immediate danger. He created it because he wanted a stronger hand at the bargaining table, which means the Fighter Corps was a diplomatic tool before it was ever a military one. The N1 was a real starfighter with real firepower, fully capable of protecting Naboo's skies and serving as a mainstay of planetary defense. Official material describes it as formidable in aerial engagement. The difference was never about whether the ship could fight, but about everything else it was designed to do at the same time. It served as a patrol, escort, and local defense craft rather than a mass-produced war machine in later Republic sense. Its role in a fight was real, but royal symbolism, escort duty, and Naboo's design philosophy were just as central to its purpose. Beneath the chrome and the ceremony, Naboo's entire security structure revolved around one idea: protect the monarch at all costs. E.K. Johnston's novel, Queen's Peril, reveals how deep that philosophy ran. One of Padme's first acts as queen was hosting a sector-wide summit to rebuild ties with Naboo's neighbors in the Chomel sector, choosing diplomacy and regional partnership over military buildup. While other worlds in the sector had grown distant during her predecessor's isolationist reign, Padme reached outward. Captain Panaka, obsessive about security, poured all his energy into shielding the Queen rather than expanding the armed forces. He revived the ancient handmaiden decoy tradition, hid blaster compartments in the throne itself, and organized his entire detail as a personal barrier around the monarch rather than a fighting force meant for open engagement. Naboo did not have a soldier class. It had a service class shaped by devotion and cleverness rather than brute force. On Naboo, every piece of technology was expected to serve as both art and instrument, and the N1 was no exception. Even the S5 heavy blaster carried by their security officers was an elegant, almost sculptural weapon. That same principle shaped the N1 from nose to tail. More than any technical feature, the chromium tells you who the ship really served. Originally, Naboo's chrome-like finish helped protect ships from harmful upper atmosphere radiation. But as newer shielding technology replaced that need, the chromium stayed and became political. Royal chromium treatment was reserved for the crown. The N1's forward chrome was a visual oath of allegiance, visible to anyone watching the ship pass overhead. The Forces of Destiny animated short, The Starfire Stunt, confirmed the hierarchy on screen. Padme Amidala flies a fully chromed N1, while Ahsoka Tano flies a standard variant with only partial chrome. You could read the politics of Naboo off the hull of its fighters without saying a word. The unarmed J-Type 327 Nubian Royal Starship completed the picture. It carried no weapons at all, relying entirely on powerful shields, while its mirrored hull was polished by skilled artisans and considered a work of art. The vessel that carried the head of state was supposed to represent the civilization itself. The N1 fighters flying alongside it were the armed half of the equation the Royal Starship deliberately lacked. And together, the unarmed transport and its armed escorts sent a clear signal to anyone watching. Even the engineering choices buried inside the hull reflected Naboo's values. The twin Nubian engines were modified to produce fewer atmospheric emissions, and the N1 carried a hyperdrive that allowed it to accompany Naboo's diplomatic missions as part of the Queen's honor guard. The compressed astromech socket told the same story. The designers chose a shallow, bottom-fed socket that required the droid to squeeze into a tighter space, all because they refused to break the N1's sleek profile for a full-depth droid well. On a pure war machine, that trade-off would be reckless. On a royal escort where visual elegance carried political weight, It was entirely logical. None of these choices would matter until the day Naboo actually had to fight, and that day was coming. Behind the scenes, the ship's creator confirmed every one of these choices. Doug Chiang, who led the art department for The Phantom Menace, revealed across multiple interviews that the N1 was inspired by an Art Nouveau hairpin, a delicate piece with a butterfly shape and a long tapered tail. George Lucas directed Chiang to use Art Nouveau as the defining visual language for Naboo, and the entire prequel design approach followed from that direction. In interviews with CG Channel and Daps Magic, Chiang described how the prequel design philosophy was rooted in a craftsman era where everything was individually made and every vehicle was treated as a piece of art. Naboo's vehicles would look nothing like the worn, industrial machines of the original trilogy. They would look sculpted, intentional, and beautiful. Chiang's design instincts went even deeper than aesthetics. The boat-shaped hull bottom came from the idea that Naboo's abundance of water meant the ships should feel aquatic. The original concept imagined the N1 landing on water, which is why it has no conventional landing gear. The designers were thinking of something closer to a Venetian vessel docked in the marble arches of a grand structure, not a rugged military machine meant for rough terrain. Compare that to a ship actually made for open warfare. The ARC-170, the heavy fighter that clone pilots flew during the Clone Wars, was also built by a democracy, but the Republic was fighting for survival against an existential military threat. The ARC-170 carried dedicated gunners, a full-depth astromech socket, rugged landing gear, and a pressurized cockpit rated for deep strikes behind enemy lines. It was designed to be stamped out by the thousands and replaced without hesitation when lost. Naboo and the Republic were both democracies, but they faced completely different kinds of danger. The Republic treated its ships as ammunition. Naboo treated them as heirlooms, each one individually tuned for a small fleet on a world that valued craftsmanship over mass production, and the care that went into each vessel reflected that pride. The N1 only fully makes sense inside the system that built and supported it. Chapter 2. The Palace completes the ship. Without the Theod Royal Palace, the N1 was only half a machine. The ship was engineered as one component of a larger system that included specialized hangars, charging ports, overhead cranes, and a dedicated engineering core. Much of the ship's operational logic sat not inside the cockpit, but inside the walls of the royal complex itself. The Theod hangars served as headquarters for both the security forces and the Starfighter Corps, housing the full N1 fleet alongside the Monarch's royal starships. A secret underground tunnel connected the hangar directly to the throne room, allowing the royal household to reach its fighters without ever stepping inside. The interior featured a massive bay with a curved ceiling and a polished floor fitted with electrostatic grates designed to keep the air clean. Because even the military hangar had to reflect Naboo's environmental standards. It was more than a docking bay. It was the nerve center of everything Naboo had for self-defense. What most people miss is what was hidden in the walls. The N1 central trailing fin, the long extension behind the cockpit that most viewers assume is just a design flourish, was actually a power and data conduit. When docked, that fin plugged directly into ports built into the hangar walls, and two critical things happened through that single connection. First, large transformers delivered a high-voltage power charge to activate the fighter's systems, topping off its energy reserves and bringing all systems to full readiness. Second, the tactical computer fed coded mission coordinates and strategic plans directly into the fighter's onboard computer and autopilot. The ship did not just receive power from the royal complex, it received its orders, navigation data, tactical objectives, the entire mission plan, all downloaded through a physical link to the seat of royal authority. No other starfighter in the galaxy operated this way. The astromech loading process told the same story. Because of the compressed socket, getting a droid in and out of the N1 required specialized ground equipment, including overhead cranes, mechanical arms, or repulsor lifts. A main index below the main flight level included a dedicated area where astromech droids were prepped before each mission. Every launch started inside the hangar, and every return was supposed to end there. Even the fleet's small size fit the philosophy perfectly. A single Venator-class Star Destroyer during the Clone Wars carried over 400 fighters. Naboo's entire fleet would barely register on a Republic Navy inventory sheet, but for a volunteer planetary defense force on a peaceful world, a small fleet was the right number. It was enough to fly patrols, escort the Queen, respond to piracy, and project a visible security presence without crossing into the kind of open buildup that would have alarmed Naboo's own citizens. The small fleet also meant each ship could be treated like a custom piece, with individually tuned engines and carefully polished chromium surfaces. A fleet of 10,000 demands a factory. A small fleet like Naboo's demands a gallery. Strategically, this is exactly why retaking the Theod hangar mattered so much in The Phantom Menace. The hangar concentrated Naboo's access to starfighters, infrastructure, and escape routes in one place. It sat next to the generator complex that powered the fleet, connected to the throne room by hidden tunnels, and contained the tactical computers and every fighter Naboo had. Even long-distance travel depended on this infrastructure. The N1's hyperdrive handled local patrol and sector travel easily, but for longer diplomatic voyages, the escort fighters could dock with the J-type diplomatic barge and refuel in transit. One more piece of a convoy rather than a lone operator. Recapturing the hangar meant reclaiming command, control, energy, and military force in a single stroke. The heavy blast door at the rear opened directly into the generator room and the plasma refinery complex, the same connected space where Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi fought the Sith Lord Maul. The hangar, the generators, and the royal complex were all one continuous system. Then came a fight nobody planned for, and overnight, the N1 became something its designers never imagined. Chapter 3: The Impossible Launch. The N1 had no proven record and no reputation beyond its beauty when Bravo Squadron launched that day. The pilots who flew it were handpicked volunteers, brave and skilled, but few had any real experience in a shooting fight. Their rigorous training had prepared them for patrol encounters and escort formations, not for a direct assault on an orbital battleship. Their commander, Rick Ollier, also served as the personal pilot for the Queen's Royal Starship. A well-funded military would never combine those two roles into one officer. Rick Ollier's dual role tells you just how thin Naboo's starfighter establishment really was. The mission they launched was, by any honest measure, an act of desperation. Queen Amidala's plan required the Gungan Grand Army to draw the droid forces out of Theod, buying time for her strike team to retake the hangar. Once the hangar was secure, Bravo Squadron could launch. A handful of light patrol fighters, crewed by volunteers, rising from a bay they had recaptured minutes earlier, flying straight at a Lucrehulk-class battleship in orbit. Their target was the ship's receiver array, the signal keeping every battle droid on the surface operational. The Lucrehulk was one of the most heavily armed vessels in the galaxy, bristling with turbo lasers and shielded by squadrons of droid fighters. Bravo Squadron had no assault craft, no capital ship support, and no fleet behind them. This was a conquered people throwing everything they had at an enemy they could not overcome, and they launched anyway because there was nothing else left to try. What happened next was something closer to a miracle than a tactical victory. Young Anakin Skywalker, a 9-year-old with no formal pilot training but reflexes sharpened by years of high-speed pod racing, had climbed into an N1 during the chaos of the hangar fight. The ship's autopilot launched him into the fray, and amid the swarm of droid fighters, the boy somehow flew directly into the droid control ship's main hangar bay. His torpedoes hit the reactor, and the chain reaction tore the massive battleship apart from the inside. Every battle droid on the surface dropped lifeless to the ground. The occupation ended in a single, impossible moment. The trained pilots of Bravo Squadron held the line against overwhelming odds and bought time they did not know they needed. Their courage and discipline kept the fight alive long enough for that impossible moment to happen. But courage and one miracle do not turn a royal escort into a purpose-built war machine. The victory at Naboo made the N1 famous across the galaxy. It did not change what the ship actually was. Still, the galaxy did not care about that distinction. The story that spread was simple and powerful. The Naboo starfighter brought down the Trade Federation flagship. A small, beautiful ship from a peaceful world toppled a giant. The reference book Battles That Changed the Galaxy includes this engagement among its entries, and its real significance was political, not military. It proved that the Republic's peacekeeping framework had failed, that a sovereign member world could be overrun by a private corporate army with almost no response from the galactic government. The N1 rode that wave from local patrol craft to galactic legend, not because of what it proved about starfighter engineering, but because of what the outcome proved about the Republic's failure to protect its own worlds. In the years that followed, far from the legend, the ship quietly went back to its original role. In Attack of the Clones, 3 N1 fighters escort Senator Amidala's diplomatic barge to Coruscant for a critical Senate vote on the Military Creation Act. One is lost to a saboteur's strike on the landing platform. Naboo kept using the N1 the same way it always had, escorting the people who mattered most, guarding them with chrome-plated fighters built for loyalty rather than conquest. Fame does not shield a ship from what comes next. Chapter 4: 20 Years in Darkness. The Clone Wars dismantled the world the N1 was made for, and they did it fast. When the Republic militarized, Venator-class Star Destroyers carried hundreds of mass-produced fighters into engagements across the galaxy. Ships like the ARC-170 rolled off assembly lines by the thousands. During the Clone Wars episode set on Naboo, the N1 still flew patrol and local defense, but the real fighting was handled by clone units and Jedi. When threats like the Blue Shadow virus put the planet in danger, it was Anakin Skywalker and clone troopers who neutralized the crisis, while Naboo's own fighters held their patrol routes overhead. Naboo contributed its senator, Padme Amidala, and its political influence to the war effort, not its ceremonial starfighters. The galaxy had moved into an era of industrial-scale warfare, and there was no place in that kind of conflict for a chrome-plated escort fighter that needed a throne room to receive its mission orders. By the time the war ended, the world the N1 belonged to had already ceased to exist. When Imperial rule took hold, the silence got worse. The Shattered Empire comic series reveals that the regime had demilitarized Naboo years earlier, leaving the planet without active starfighters or trained pilots. For more than 20 years, the N1 sat behind locked blast doors in darkness, stored inside the royal complex like artifacts in a tomb. The volunteer pilots who had once flown them grew old and scattered. Men and women who had considered it the highest honor of their lives to serve the crown spent their remaining years grounded, knowing their ships were gathering dust behind doors they could not open. The chromium on the forward hull slowly tarnished. The power connections that had once fed high-voltage charges and coded mission data into every fighter went silent. The engineering core that had tuned the engines and polished the chrome was gone. The galaxy moved on. Naboo's fleet did not. Then, weeks after the fall of the second Death Star, the locked doors opened for the first time in over 2 decades. Princess Leia Organa and rebel pilot Shara Bey, the mother of future Resistance pilot Poe Dameron, traveled to Naboo on a diplomatic mission to secure the planet's support for the new government. They met Queen Sosha Saruna in the Theed Royal Palace. Before their work could begin, the Imperial remnant struck, carrying out the late Emperor's posthumous orders through Operation Cinder. A Star Destroyer called the Torment deployed satellite arrays designed to tear apart Naboo's weather and render the planet uninhabitable. Palpatine had ordered the complete ruin of his own home world. Naboo's security chief delivered grim news. The planet had no starfighters and no pilots, but Queen Saruna knew about the closed hangar wing. She used her royal authority to open it, and as Leia stepped inside the long, dark bay, she felt a cold chill run through her. A force vision of Maul, a shadow still lingering in the walls of the connected generator complex where he had fallen decades earlier. The same wall still carried the memory of what had happened there. Shara Bey moved through the rows of mothball fighters, checking each one for signs of life in their long dormant systems. She found a handful that could still fly. With no other options, Leia, Bey, and Queen Saruna climbed into the ancient N1s and launched into orbit against the Imperial satellite array. Bey engaged TIE fighters pouring from the Star Destroyer, while Leia and Saruna targeted the satellites. They were outgunned and nearly overwhelmed before the Alliance fleet led by Lando Calrissian aboard the cruiser Restoration arrived and finished the fight. 20 years in storage, and the ship still flew. But they needed a fleet behind them to survive, just as they had always needed a home beneath them. The N1 outlasted the regime and flew one final time to save the planet it was born to protect, but its strangest chapter was still ahead. Chapter 5: A Relic Worth Choosing. 4 decades after its prime, the N1 had become something no one predicted, a collector's item. When mechanic Peli Motto presented Din Djarin with a derelict N1 in her Mos Eisley hangar, she pitched it the way a vintage dealer would pitch a rare find, emphasizing its handmade construction, its royal commission, its direct connection to the Queen of Naboo. She was selling history and craftsmanship, not firepower. By Din Djarin's era, the N1 was no longer just a fighter. It was an antique from a lost political world, a relic of a time before the Empire, when volunteer defenders and chrome-plated fighters protected an elected queen, and every ship was treated as a work of art. All of that was gone, except for the ships themselves. What Motto and Djarin did next proved the original N1 could not survive outside its world without being fundamentally changed. They stripped the fighter down to its bare frame and rebuilt it with salvaged parts, swapping out the laser cannons for larger models and mounting a new sublight engine in the center of the body, an addition the original Naboo engineers would never have tolerated. The royal power systems were replaced by improvised charging methods, and the sleek profile those engineers spent years perfecting was gutted to fit raw performance. Doug Chiang, who helped design the rebuilt version for the show, framed it perfectly in an IndieWire interview. In the prequel era, the N1 was like a car from the 1920s, when everything was still individually made. By the time Djarin got his hands on one, it was a vintage car being hot-rodded in a junkyard. And yet, the choice of ship mattered more than the modifications. Din Djarin was a Mandalorian, raised in a culture that valued Beskar armor, heavy firepower, and readiness above almost everything. He could have chosen any ship in the galaxy, from a gunship to a freighter to a purpose-built assault craft. Instead, he chose a ceremonial escort fighter from a pacifist world, a ship without a fleet, built for a queen who was long gone, powered by a home that no longer existed. The N1 needed a home to be whole, and Djarin no longer had one of his own either. He had lost the covert that raised him, the ship that carried him, and the certainty of the creed he once followed without question. George Lucas had always insisted that designers ground their work in history, and this rebuilt N1 was living proof of how deeply the original was tied to a specific time, a specific place, and a political order that had been swept away. When Djarin punched the throttle over Beggar's Canyon, that high whine from the twin Nubian engines was the sound of a lost world still refusing to disappear. After the run, he called the flight Wizard, the same word a 9-year-old Anakin Skywalker used to use on Tatooine a lifetime ago. Two pilots from two different eras, both strapped into the same ship, both finding something in it they did not expect. Plenty of ships were better at winning fights, but very few carried their world's identity as completely as the N1. Every other starfighter in the galaxy was built to answer one problem: how to win in a fight. The N1 was built to answer something else entirely. Naboo wanted to know what their sovereignty looked like catching sunlight over the plains of Theed, and they poured that answer into chrome plating, individually tuned engines, a throne-linked power system, and a hull shaped like a boat because the designers imagined it gliding across water. Every choice that confused the rest of the galaxy, the compressed droid socket, the missing landing gear, the total reliance on royal infrastructure, was the right answer to a question only Naboo was asking. The ship was never flawed, it was never confused. It knew exactly what it was. And that may be the most important thing the N1 teaches about design itself. Every time the galaxy measured the ship by standards it was never trying to meet, the real failure was in the measuring. That was always the N1's answer, from Bravo Squadron's desperate launch over Theed to Shara Bey climbing into a mothball fighter 2 decades later. And at the very end, when Lando Calrissian called on the galaxy to rise, an N1 was among the 14,000 civilian ships that answered. The same ship from the Battle of Naboo, flown by an unnamed volunteer, was present at the final battle of the Skywalker saga. Still, long after the royal complex went dark and the volunteer pilots scattered, people across the galaxy are still restoring it, still modifying it, still choosing to fly it into fights it was never made for, doing exactly what Peli Motto did in that Mos Eisley hangar. Naboo built more than a fighter. They built something worth bringing back. The N1 only worked as part of a home. It drew its power and even its orders from a palace, and without that palace, it was half a machine. That raises a different kind of question about starships, one that has nothing to do with weapons or speed. Which ones could you actually live in?
Star Wars ships are built to handle combat, pursuit, and dangerous environments rather than long-term living. Because of that focus, most ships give up comfort, privacy, and stability even when they're not under fire. When ships are judged not by reputation, but by how they support daily life, a very different order appears. Interior room, safety, maintenance needs, mobility, and basic livability matter far more than firepower or speed. Some ships fail almost immediately under that test, while others quietly prove capable of working as actual homes. The Sentinel class was designed to move people quickly, not to keep them alive comfortably. Nearly all available space goes to troop deployment rather than living areas, leaving no dedicated sleeping berths at all. Anyone staying aboard ends up resting on rigid troop benches designed for armored stormtroopers rather than unarmored bodies. Reference material shows these ships were built to deliver soldiers into combat zones, not to house them between missions. Climate control exists only to keep soldiers running, not comfortable, and engine vibration travels freely through the hull while mechanical noise becomes a constant presence that never fades. There's no galley, no proper refresher, and no leisure area. Medical support is strictly battlefield-oriented, so outside of active missions, there's simply nowhere to go and nothing to do. Where it does perform well is survivability, with safety reaching 7 out of 10 thanks to armor and shielding built to handle contested landings. Strong atmospheric handling allows it to land in extreme environments with confidence, but comfort sits at the absolute bottom with just 3 out of 10. Staying aboard feels less like occupying a ship and more like being locked in a flying detention cell where even sitting down hurts. The Sentinel class ranks dead last at number 20 because it offers the worst daily living conditions of any ship in this ranking. Cold Durasteel interiors, exposed restraints, and no personal space create an experience that's miserable from the first hour aboard. What comes next at least had civilian origins, though that hardly makes the experience any better. The Action 6 transport exists to haul freight, and that singular purpose shapes everything about life aboard. Designers put cargo bays first before figuring out where to put the crew. Technical specs indicate crew areas were an afterthought, tucked into the hull away from the massive storage holds. Freight always takes priority here, and the crew's well-being never enters the equation. You can technically live aboard, but the ship treats you as secondary to its true purpose. The cargo bay doors grind open at every port, while loading droids clatter across metal grating at all hours. Engine harmonics rattle through the bulkheads, and after 3 weeks, that noise stops being background and starts being your whole life. The galley and refresher handle basic needs without any comfort, and entertainment depends on whatever the crew brings aboard. The large hull offers some protection through mass alone, but these bulk freighters were never built for combat. Finding steady hauling work remains possible throughout the outer rim, though profit margins stay thin and operating costs demand a larger crew than light freighters require. Practicality reaches a modest 6 out of 10, thanks to actual cargo capacity, but comfort barely improves to 4. Life aboard means accepting that you're just another piece of equipment the ship needs to function. At number 19, the Action 6 barely edges out the Sentinel through slightly better amenities and some practical cargo capacity, though that's hardly a victory worth celebrating. At least this ship never pretended to care about you, while what comes next actually started as something decent before Imperial conversion stripped that away. The Gozanti-class cruiser started life as a civilian cargo hauler before the Empire transformed it into an armed transport carrying 4 TIE fighters on external docking clamps. Though originally designed by the Corellian Engineering Corporation, Imperial military conversion removed most civilian comforts. Standard military berths support a crew of 12 in spaces that are useful rather than pleasant, and 2 months of supplies are possible if you can handle the confined conditions. Those 4 TIE fighters mounted on the hull provide solid defensive capability, which is fortunate because the interior wasn't designed to make the wait between deployments any easier. Few pirates want to fight a ship that can launch 4 starfighters, giving the Gozanti a safety score of 7 out of 10. A basic galley and refresher exist, but no recreational area breaks the monotony, and days blur together when every corridor looks the same. You're essentially living at a military checkpoint that happens to move through space. 12 crew members are needed to run everything properly, and that Imperial look creates problems in many systems after the war. During the war, the hull shape meant authority. Afterward, it draws stares from New Republic patrols and nervous port authorities who remember exactly what those ships represented. The Gozanti sits at 18 because Imperial conversion stripped away whatever livability the civilian version once offered, leaving something barely more tolerable than the cargo hauler below it. Better defensive capability through those mounted fighters edges it slightly higher, though daily life remains grim. From here, we finally reach a ship from an era where builders still cared about durability. The XS Stock Light Freighter represents the Republic era's take on light freighter design, with elements that would later influence the famous YT series. Legends sources confirm Onderonian rebels used XS freighters during the Clone Wars when Lux Bonteri supported resistance operations, showing these ships still worked even as they were getting old. Standard light freighter layouts provide private berths that remain modest by later standards, and the living area works without impressing, offering basic climate control and enough room to establish personal territory. What makes the XS remarkable is that a ship this old still flies as dependably as freighters half its age. Republic-era origins mean you can find repair knowledge across most of the galaxy, though parts become harder to track down the further you drift from core worlds. Shielding and basic weapons keep the ship safe enough for routine operations, while a galley, refresher, and common area handle daily needs without luxury. Every category lands at 6 out of 10, creating perfect mediocrity. The XS works without standing out, and time spent aboard feels completely unremarkable, which, after 3 military nightmares, actually counts as progress. Landing at number 17, the XS earns its spot through balanced performance that treats crew members like people instead of cargo or soldiers. Nothing here impresses, but nothing actively makes life miserable either, which represents meaningful improvement over everything that came before. The next entry throws that balance out completely to chase one thing pilots obsess over: raw speed. The HWK-290 light freighter built its reputation through raw speed that made it legendary among pilots who put performance over everything else. Edge of the Empire lists this compact ship as the fastest in its size class, which explains why Kyle Katarn's moldy crow made the design famous. For pilots who live in the cockpit, the HWK-290 offers something no other light freighter can match, though the compact design sacrifices interior volume for performance systems in ways that become obvious after the first week aboard. Nothing in this weight class can outrun an HWK-290, with a mobility reaching 9 out of 10. But nothing else expects you to sleep in a cabin this small either, with comfort dropping to just 4. The galley and refresher are limited at best. You eat, you sleep, you fly. That speed provides defensive options that armor can't match, since when trouble appears, the HWK-290 can outrun it rather than outfight it. The cockpit becomes home, while the rest remains secondary. Making this ship your home means accepting that every inch of space behind you was sacrificed so the engines could scream. The HWK-290 takes 16th place because its extreme speed makes up for tight berths in ways that matter to pilots who spend most of their time flying anyway. It knows exactly what it is, and makes no apologies for trading livability for performance in service of a clear purpose. The next ship faces an even stranger challenge. It was never designed for anyone to live on at all. Only 6 Firespray 31 prototypes ever existed, all built for the prison moon of Uvo 4, before Jango Fett stole one and destroyed the rest. The unusual design keeps the cockpit facing skyward while landing, but forward during flight, requiring an internal gyro system that keeps occupants oriented. Daily life means adapting to a ship that literally shifts its relationship to gravity depending on what it's doing. Legendary combat power defines the Firespray, but living space was literally added as an afterthought. The engineers who designed this ship built it to hold dangerous criminals, and they never imagined someone would voluntarily make it their home. Jango Fett installed basic crew facilities because the original design included no living space at all. The main cabin offers 6 chairs and a holoprojector, with coffin-shaped compartments serving as cells rather than bunks. Privacy means climbing into a chamber designed to hold criminals, and only 1 month of supplies limits extended trips. Heavily fortified shields and weapons, including blaster cannons, missiles, and seismic charges, make this formidable in a fight, lifting safety to 9 out of 10. Medical and food facilities are minimal since the ship focuses entirely on hunting rather than living. The rare design creates maintenance challenges, and everyone who sees you land knows exactly what you do for a living. You're sleeping in prison cells and embracing an identity whether it fits or not. At number 15, the fire spray ranks here because exceptional combat capability and intimidation factor barely compensate for living space literally designed to confine prisoners. The ship demands you become the person it expects, which gives it slightly more identity and purpose than the speed-focused freighter below it. What comes next took an entirely different approach, built for diplomacy in an era that believed elegance could prevent war. The crimson hull of the Consular-class cruiser announced "Don't shoot" in every system, a message that worked beautifully until the Clone Wars proved how wrong that assumption could be. The Radiant 7 carried Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi on their mission to the Trade Federation, establishing the design's place in galactic history. Multiple crew berths feature rooms fit for diplomats, and a detachable salon pod provides unique meeting space for negotiations. Time spent aboard a Consular class reflects an era when the Republic believed presentation mattered as much as function. The Consular class comes from an era when the Republic believed elegance and negotiation could solve any conflict. And that philosophy explains why it offers abundant grace, but almost nothing when you need to defend yourself. Minimal weapons relied on Republic protection rather than self-defense, leaving safety at just 4 out of 10. During the Clone Wars, that crimson color announced weakness to anyone with hostile intentions, turning the ship's most distinctive feature into a target. Meeting facilities and pleasant common areas support the ship's primary surface well enough, raising comfort to 7 out of 10. The recognizable crimson profile became dangerous in hostile environments as the Old Republic collapsed. Daily life feels graceful and refined right up until someone decides to attack, which makes it less a home and more a beautiful gamble. The Consular class lands at 14 because it finally offers comfortable living spaces that lift it above everything before, but terrible defensive capability keeps it from climbing higher. This ship represents an era that no longer exists, where beauty mattered more than survival. The next entry inverts that philosophy completely. No beauty, no elegance, just cheap engineering that refuses to quit. The Guttrock 720 represents an ambitious attempt by Bith-founded Guttrock Industries to compete with Corellian YT series freighters. This ship, built on the Bith homeworld of Clactor, offered 33% more cargo space than the YT 1300 at a lower price, and on paper, it should have dominated the market. Uncomfortable crew bunks stand out as a major drawback, and display markings adapted for Bith eyes are hard for other species to read. Every alarm sounds like a Bith, designed for Bith ears, high-pitched, persistent, and calibrated to frequencies that make human teeth itch. The Guttrock costs less than anything rolling out of Corellian shipyards, and every uncomfortable moment aboard makes it perfectly clear why. A built-in shield generator and solid hull provide durability that earned lasting owner loyalty, despite the discomfort. The Guttrock 720 survives situations that destroy lesser freighters, and a basic galley and refresher exist alongside engineering sections that spread between fore and aft areas, turning routine maintenance into a walking exercise. Only 23,000 credits for a used unit puts this freighter within reach of operators who can't afford Corellian prices. While Guttrock Industries went bankrupt, the ships they built kept flying, with practicality hitting 9 out of 10. Making this ship your home means tolerating constant annoyances in exchange for reliability you can actually afford. Sitting at number 13, the Guttrock shows you can build something reliable without making it pleasant. And when you're working the Outer Rim on a budget, that exceptional practicality matters more than the elegant ship below it that can't defend itself. What comes next shows the Empire could occasionally build something elegant when it served their interests. The Lambda-class T-4A shuttle represented an elegant departure from brutish Imperial engineering, serving Emperor Palpatine and Darth Vader personally. The standard setup is troop transport with minimal living space, though high-ranking officials often converted the cargo area into personal facilities that showed what the platform could become. Imperial engineers never produced a more elegant shuttle than this one, though that elegance can't hide the military origins that define every aspect of daily life aboard. Stock, you get 2 months of supplies and Spartan rooms. Invest in VIP conversion, and suddenly, you've got secure HoloNet transceivers, upgraded facilities, and spaces that would make an ISB officer jealous. The Class 1 hyperdrive outperforms most civilian ships, and strong deflector shields protect against serious threats, with safety reaching 9 out of 10. The tri-wing silhouette turns heads at every port. Imperial officers once commanded respect in this ship. Now you're explaining to nervous dock workers that you're not with the Remnant. Converting one into comfortable living space is possible, but that distinctive profile means you'll never blend into a crowd. You're living in a piece of Imperial history that announces itself everywhere you land. The Lambda reaches 12th place through superior defensive capability and excellent mobility that finally lift overall performance above ships that either lack protection or can't move well. For those willing to invest in VIP conversion and accept the attention that Imperial design attracts, it delivers solid capability. The next ship also draws stares everywhere, though not because it's trying to intimidate anyone. The H-type Nubian yacht served as personal transport for Naboo's political elite, most notably Senator Padme Amidala during the Clone Wars. Its distinctive silver coating marked its status as a former Queen of Naboo, making it instantly recognizable across the galaxy. The design traded offensive capability for speed and shields, a choice that proved costly when combat found the ship regardless. The sleek, luxury yacht interior features rooms fit for diplomats, though available sources focus on short missions rather than extended living. No yacht in the galaxy can match the H-type's raw speed. The Class 0.5 to 0.9 hyperdrive ranks among the fastest in the galaxy, with mobility hitting a perfect 10 out of 10. That velocity comes at a cost, since the silver hull turns every journey into a spectacle that makes staying hidden impossible. For someone like a Naboo senator, that visibility was part of the point. For anyone trying to avoid attention, it becomes a serious problem. Strong shields help make up for minimal weapons, but Senator Amidala's yacht took fire at Geonosis, and another H-type went down at Rhodia. When someone decides that silver hull needs holes in it, speed alone won't save you. Daily life here means trusting velocity over everything else, and hoping that's enough when someone decides to attack. At 11, the H-type earns its placement through unmatched speed and true luxury styling that create appeal despite defensive vulnerabilities. It puts velocity and aesthetics first, while accepting serious risks for both. The next ship finally addresses something every cramped freighter before it has lacked: actual room to breathe. The Wayfarer-class medium transport came from Kuat Systems Engineering as a modular ship with interchangeable sections. Smugglers, criminals, adventurers, and rebel forces all found uses for this versatile platform, though cost limits restricted production to only the hangar bay version. What sets the Wayfarer apart from every cramped light freighter is its 9 separate cabins, which finally give crews something most spacers only dream about: actual room to breathe. Those 9 cabins include a captain's cabin, 2 officer berths, and 6 crew cabins lining the port and starboard bulkheads. 4 showers and 2 stalls handle hygiene needs, while 3 months of supplies exceed most light freighters. The modular hangar bay can hold 2 starfighters or vehicles, and a dedicated galley with multiple refresher facilities lets you establish routines and claim personal space. For crews tired of fighting over a single refresher, that alone makes the Wayfarer worth considering. The ship is clumsy and hard to pilot in anything less than ideal conditions, and 8 to 10 crew members are needed to run everything properly, which means finding people willing to stay aboard long term. Spacious but plain, comfort reaches 8 out of 10, while the Wayfarer provides room without style. The experience feels liberating after years in tight berths, even if the ship itself is forgettable. Breaking into the top 10, the Wayfarer demonstrates that interior space matters more than any single feature below it, finally giving crews the ability to spread out and establish actual homes instead of just surviving. Poor handling remains its weakness, but when living conditions improve this dramatically, most crews accept that trade-off. Canon Engineering's next answer trades that space back for overwhelming firepower. The YT-2400 light freighter was Canon Engineering Corporation's attempt to improve on the YT-1300 by offering better weapons and handling in a more compact package. The design became a favorite among smugglers who valued its 13 weapon hardpoints, as shown by Dash Rendar's Outrider during the Galactic Civil War. Strong combat capability and YT series reliability come with confined sleeping arrangements, since the ship trades interior volume for performance systems. The YT-2400 manages to cram 13 weapon hardpoints into its compact frame, and when fitted with warship-grade shields, escape pods, twin rotating laser cannon turrets, and duralloy plating, the ship becomes formidable in a fight. Whoever flies it will find just one small bunk waiting at the end of every firefight. The designers clearly expected pilots to appreciate firepower more than sleeping space. A recreation lounge with auto chef handles food prep, while a med station provides first aid. YT series parts and repair knowledge span the galaxy, and a used price of 32,000 credits makes it available to serious operators. Safety reaches 8 out of 10. While practicality and mobility both hit 8 as well. Life aboard means accepting a limited sleeping area in exchange for knowing you can handle whatever finds you. At 9th place, the YT-2400 sacrifices the Wayfarer's generous space for versatility across multiple categories, earning strong performance in combat capability, accessibility, and movement. For operators who want firepower and YT series reliability more than elbow room, that's a worthwhile exchange. The next ship takes Corellian thinking in a completely different direction, going big instead of compact. The YV-666 light freighter was Corellian Engineering Corporation's entry into the larger freighter market, offering a 3-deck design much larger than the YT series. Bosk's Houndstooth transformed the design into a bounty hunter's mobile headquarters, hiding a huge collection of weapons and interrogation tools behind its plain exterior. The YV-666's 3 full decks provide so much interior volume that you could disappear inside your own ship for hours before anyone found you. Private berths, training chamber, armory, advanced medical bay, and 3 to 6 months of supplies all fit within those 3 levels. The X-10D droid brain responds to verbal commands from anywhere on the ship, simplifying daily operations. Training chambers and armories support an active lifestyle, while the advanced medical bay handles serious injuries. For bounty hunters who need to keep targets alive or patch themselves up after difficult captures, those facilities become essential. Bosk packed the Houndstooth with enough weapons to crack a convoy. Quad lasers, ion cannons, missiles, and fire-linked cannons that turn the freighter into something bounty hunters actually fear. An internal hangar for a Z-95 AF-4 Headhunter offers escape capability. Droid brain integration lets one person operate a ship that should need a crew, though the Class 3 hyperdrive stock is slow. Comfort, safety, and daily amenities all reach 8 out of 10. The experience feels like having an entire facility to yourself, which for solo operators becomes both luxury and isolation. Ranking 8th, the YV-666 delivers exceptional volume that creates the first truly well-rounded living environment on this list, with 3 major categories all reaching the same high standard. What holds it back from climbing higher is slow stock hyperdrive and the reality that all this space feels excessive unless you actually need it. The next ship shows that when cost stops being a concern, spacecraft can become works of art. The Baudo-class star yacht represents personal spacecraft as a luxury statement. Each ship was built to the exact specifications of its wealthy owner by Mendel Baudo shipyards. These beautiful, almost organic-looking ships were among the most exclusive in the galaxy, with options including Alderaan Greenwood wall plates, Tangdor gem decorations, and full game sets including Dejarik, Pazak, and Sabak tables. Every Baudo class is handcrafted to its owner's exact vision, turning each yacht into a one-of-a-kind masterpiece. That exclusivity makes them tempting targets for anyone who recognizes what they're looking at. Only 1 month of supplies limits extended trips, but 1 month passes in true luxury. A single turret-mounted laser cannon provides minimal defense, creating problems when the ship's beauty attracts exactly the wrong kind of attention. 400,000 credits makes this among the most expensive options on this list, and the Baudo's reputation as the favorite ship of rich youngsters makes it a frequent target for theft. Weak defenses and limited supplies create hard limits that beauty can't overcome. Lifestyle appeal reaches a perfect 10 out of 10, while comfort hits 9. For those who put luxury above all else and have the credits to afford it, the Baudo class delivers an experience few ships can match. Life aboard means embracing indulgence while accepting vulnerability. The Baudo class reaches 7th place by offering modern luxury and handcrafted beauty that raise appeal higher than anything below it. But weak defenses and limited supplies prevent it from climbing further. Cost alone doesn't guarantee a higher ranking when fundamental vulnerabilities remain. What comes next demonstrates that ancient craftsmanship can still outperform modern designs despite being thousands of years old. The Dynamic class freighter stands as a relic of the Old Republic era when each ship was handcrafted on planet Transel with only 1 ship made at a time. The Ebon Hawk carried Revan and Mitra Surik across the galaxy during the Mandalorian Wars and Jedi Civil War, demonstrating these ships could handle extended trips spanning years. 8 months of supplies in the upgraded setup set this freighter apart from virtually every competitor. Private crew berths provide actual privacy, and the deck sits on a gyro system allowing occupants to stay upright regardless of ship position. 4,000 years after the first Dynamic class rolled off the assembly line, these ancient freighters still outperform most ships built within living memory. Dual turbo laser turrets, heavy laser cannons, concealed anti-personnel blaster, and proton torpedoes provide serious firepower when fully upgraded. Advanced medical bay, training chamber, and armory support long-term living in ways most modern freighters can't match, with daily amenities reaching 9 out of 10. Old Republic-era design means finding replacement components becomes archaeology rather than shopping. You're hunting museum pieces, not spare parts. The storied history of famous examples adds appeal that no modern freighter can match, and private berths with the gyro system create living conditions that feel thoroughly designed rather than added as an afterthought. Life aboard connects you to galactic history in ways newer ships simply can't provide. Landing at number 6, the Dynamic class earns this placement through exceptional facilities and 8 months of supplies that outlast nearly everything else, demonstrating that ancient doesn't mean obsolete when engineering was this thoughtful. Parts scarcity prevents it from ranking higher despite those impressive capabilities. The next ship shifts scale entirely, moving beyond personal craft into something that requires entire organizations to run. The CR-90 Corvette represents the peak of Corellian Engineering Corporation's ship design for official purposes. The Tantive 4 served the Royal House of Alderaan while earning the class its Blockade Runner nickname through its powerful 11-engine array. This was the first ship seen in the original Star Wars film, and 150 meters of interior volume includes formal dining rooms, conference rooms, and luxurious staterooms. A full year of supplies fills the CR-90's hold, representing the longest duration of any ship on this list, though dividing those provisions among 165 crew members makes that abundance stretch thinner than it first appears. Princess Leia's quarters included fine art, expensive furniture, and multiple rooms, offering living conditions that no smaller ship can approach. Dual turbo laser turrets, dorsal and ventral, plus 4 single turbo lasers provide adequate defense. Formal dining rooms for entertaining and conference rooms for work supported the Resistance era when most support crew lived and slept aboard the Tantive 4 when not on duty. For those lucky enough to secure officer berths, the CR-90 offers living conditions that rival planetary accommodations. Both comfort and daily amenities reach perfect tens. A minimum of 30 crew members are needed, scaling up to 165 in full setup. A ship this big attracts attention you don't want. High operating costs strain any budget, and the ship can't land easily on most surfaces. Running a CR-90 requires an organization behind you, not just a willing crew. Life aboard means being part of something larger than yourself, for better or for worse. Breaking into the top 5, the CR-90 represents the peak of what's possible aboard a ship, achieving perfect marks and living conditions that no smaller vessel can match. Terrible practicality keeps it from climbing higher, since most people can't access what it offers without substantial resources and crew. The next ship demands resources of an entirely different kind, the wealth and artistry of an entire planet. The J-Type 327 Nubian Royal Starship is perhaps the most beautiful spacecraft ever built. The collaboration between Theed Palace Space Vessel Engineering Corps and Nubia Star Drives created a ship to serve as Queen Amidala's personal transport during the Trade Federation's invasion of Naboo. Only the Queen's ship could bear full chromium plating according to Naboo tradition. No spacecraft in the galaxy can match the J-Type 327 for sheer beauty. Yet, that stunning chromium exterior hides a complete inability to fight back against anyone who decides to attack it. The J-Type 327 carries no offensive weapons whatsoever, relying entirely on powerful deflector shields that can withstand bombardment by turbo laser emplacements. Complex damage sensors enable immediate crew response, and up to 8 astromech droids can deploy for external repairs during flight. Royal-class amenities with climate control in every compartment support the ship's purpose. And comfort reaches a perfect 10 out of 10, while lifestyle appeal matches that mark. The complete absence of weapons creates absolute dependence on escorts. Without protection, the J-Type becomes a beautiful but vulnerable target that its shields can only defend for so long. Class 1.8 hyperdrive and Hedon 5 sublight engines that exceed most starfighter speeds provide exceptional performance. Speed becomes the primary defensive tool when shields aren't enough. You're floating through space in a work of art, magnificent right up until someone attacks. At number 4, the J-Type 327 represents unattainable royal luxury that matches the CR-90's comfort while requiring far fewer crew. But complete lack of weapons prevents it from reaching the top 3 despite exceptional beauty and amenities. The next ship brings that luxury down to something more accessible, legendary versatility that generations of spacers transformed into actual homes. The YT-1300 light freighter pioneered radical modularity when Corellian Engineering Corporation introduced it around 60 BBY. The Millennium Falcon stands as the most famous example, though its heavily altered state makes it far from a typical YT-1300. The design's flexibility allowed owners to transform these workhorses into virtually any setup, and a private cabin with bunk beds, shared refresher, 2 months of supplies, and hidden compartments under deck plates come standard. What makes the YT-1300 legendary is how versatility, speed, and tested livability combine to let generations of owners transform a basic freighter into a home worth keeping. When upgraded, heavy shielding becomes possible. The Falcon carried warship-grade shields from Myanmar shipyards alongside escape pods, twin rotating laser cannon turrets, and duralloy plating over vital areas. A properly upgraded YT-1300 can survive fights that destroy military ships. A small auto chef, galley, emergency auto dock, and lounge area with dejeric tables support daily life. The YT-1300P passenger variant replaced cargo with luxury facilities, showing what the platform could become. The design is everywhere, meaning replacement components are easy to find. Mobility reaches a perfect 10 out of 10, while safety, it's a strong 9. Stock livability is modest, but the platform's upgrade potential lets owners build exactly the home they need. The design is ubiquitous without being invisible, common enough to blend in, but capable enough to stand out when needed. Making this ship yours happens in ways no other platform allows. The YT-1300 claims third place through legendary versatility and accessibility that let anyone transform a basic freighter into exactly what they need. What makes it rank here isn't any single perfect score, but how customization potential and widespread availability combine to create actual homes. Only 2 ships rank higher, and both were designed specifically for permanent living rather than adapted to it. The VCX-100 light freighter earned legendary status as the mobile home for the Spectre's rebel cell throughout the Imperial era. Captain Hera Syndulla used the Ghost as her home for decades, raising her son Jason aboard, and demonstrating these ships could work as a permanent residence. Individual cabins provide actual privacy, while the common room supports shared living and recreation alongside dedicated galleys. The Ghost stands apart because it was purpose-built for crews who intended to live aboard permanently, and decades of continuous use by the same family prove the designers achieved exactly what they set out to create. Though 2 months of supplies matched the standard, life support can sustain the full complement indefinitely in sleeping berths designed for permanent living rather than temporary transport. Dorsal laser cannon turret with 360-degree rotation, 2 forward laser cannons, and 2 proton torpedo launchers provide firepower strong enough to destroy Architens-class cruisers. 87 illegal upgrades to stealth systems earned the Ghost its name. Tested as a home across decades, Hera Syndulla raised her son Jason aboard and still prefers flying the Ghost to other ships. The Ghost participated in the Battle of Scarif, the Battle of Endor, and the Battle of Exegol, surviving the most dangerous operations in galactic history. 2 crew minimum makes practical operation achievable, with practicality hitting 9 out of 10. Excellent stealth capabilities feature electronic countermeasures sufficient to evade Imperial sensors, and safety also reaches 9. Consistency across every category makes the Ghost a rare ship designed and tested for permanent living. Being aboard feels like being home, the highest praise any ship can earn. Taking second place, the Ghost earns this ranking through remarkable consistency, with nothing scoring below 8 and multiple categories reaching 9. Unlike the YT-1300, which requires customization to become a home, the VCX-100 was designed as one from the start, and decades of tested use confirm it works. Only one ship surpasses it, and that ship was designed for nothing else but comfortable living. The Personal Luxury Yacht 3000, also known as Lady Luck, represents the absolute peak of civilian spacecraft luxury. Sorosub Corporation created a ship where Lando Calrissian featured amenities unheard of on most starships, including a jet stream meditation pool, a crystal garden, and an observation deck with exterior viewing areas. What places the Personal Luxury Yacht 3000 at the top of this list is how true luxury, comprehensive livability features, and the ability for a single pilot to operate a 50-meter ship all come together in ways no other vessel matches. The meditation pool, crystal garden, private owner's suite decorated with rare art, 5 visitor cabins, custom-fitted loungers that mold to your body throughout, and an observation deck with exterior access create an experience unlike anything else in this ranking. Even the escape pods feature grav couches covered in the finest Corellian leather. 1 month of supplies is the only limit. 5 retractable laser cannons concealed within the hull, small ion cannon turret, and dual deflector shield generators provide defensive capability. Hidden compartments support discretion, and the droid brain can pilot in emergencies. Solo operable despite 50-meter length, though very expensive at an estimated 500,000 credits or more. Class 2 hyperdrive with backup, atmospheric speed of 1,000 kilometers per hour, and good landing capability remain adequate for civilian operation. Comfort, daily amenities, and lifestyle appeal all reach perfect 10s. The ship announces refined taste and substantial means, while providing comfort that actually matters. The Personal Luxury Yacht 3000 is the only ship on this list designed from the hull plates inward for comfortable living. While the 1-month supply limit requires regular resupply, the meditation pool, crystal garden, observation deck, and private suites create living conditions that no other ship approaches. You're not occupying a spacecraft. You're inhabiting a masterpiece that happens to fly. At number 1, the Personal Luxury Yacht 3000 earns top placement because comfort wasn't balanced against other priorities. It was the entire point from the beginning. 3 perfect scores in the categories that define livability, combined with solid performance everywhere else, makes this the only ship where you live rather than just survive. And that singular focus is exactly why it stands above everything else. 20 ships produce 20 different answers, and the pattern is clear. The ships most celebrated in galactic history rarely perform well when judged as places to live. Combat capability doesn't translate into livability, and speed alone doesn't create stability.
Those ships were judged by how well they kept people alive and comfortable. One fleet was built for the exact opposite. Far from any home or safe harbor, a secret armada was taking shape for a single purpose. It would put a dead man back in power and burn down anyone who stood in its way. It was the largest and most terrible thing the Emperor ever ordered built. At the edge of the known galaxy, hidden from every chart, lies a world where the sky churns with a storm that never ends, and the surface stretches out as cracked black stone, lit only by the restless flicker of lightning. Any ship that drifts too close is swallowed by a red zone of exotic space that tears it apart before it can turn back. Beneath that storm, deep underground, a mountain of kyber crystal waits in the dark, and around it, in vaults that seem to have no bottom, thousands of star destroyers are being built in silence. This is Exegol, and by the time anyone in the galaxy realizes it exists, the fleet is almost ready to fly. Decades earlier, on Coruscant, a polite senator from Naboo was shaking hands with people whose names no one bothered to remember. That senator was Sheev Palpatine, and long before he ever wore the title of Emperor, he was already building a second government no one could see. The trouble with a project nobody can see is that nobody can save it either. It was a contradiction Palpatine spent his life refining one half of, and never solved the other. On the surface, he looked like any other rising politician, skilled in conversation, careful in alliance, and at ease in the public world of the Senate. Beneath that image, however, he was already linked to clandestine networks of bankers, financiers, and industrialists from the galaxy's most important sectors. These were not political allies in the ordinary sense. Their names appeared on no Senate roll, and none of them held a seat in the Chancellor's cabinet. They were instead the quiet backbone of the galactic economy, and their loyalty ran to him personally rather than to any office or institution. Nothing about the network was written down in a single place, and nothing about it could be traced from one end to the other. Each project he ever undertook from that point forward would be a larger version of the same idea. The same shadow network applied to a heavier task. The clone army would be the first test. The Death Star would be the second. Exegol would be the third, the largest, and the last. The Clone Wars taught Palpatine a lesson that would shape every secret project he ever undertook. He learned that if anyone wanted to build something enormous without being detected, the problem was never raw materials. The real problem was always information. When the Kaminoans began growing the clone army, no identifiable figure in the galaxy was funding them directly. Instead, Palpatine funneled untold billions in credits from the Republic's own budgets through a maze of intermediaries. By the time the credits reached Kamino, no single auditor in the Senate could reconstruct the trail. The warships for that army were built the same way. In Legends, according to the Essential Guide to Warfare, Kuat Drive Yards took the contract through its subsidiary, Rathana Heavy Engineering. Rathana itself was a hidden world in wild space, accessible only through encrypted coordinates downloaded from a secure beacon. Non-KDY ships were not permitted to visit. The director of KDY received a contract whose true buyer did not exist on paper. Billions arrived on schedule, and no one on the company side ever met the customer. Palpatine learned something else during those years, this time about the workforce itself. The clones he ordered from Kamino were engineered so that loyalty was written into their genes, and they were conditioned from birth to follow orders without debate. After the Republic fell and the Empire rose, the same principles moved to a larger scale. By the time the Death Star was under construction, the secrecy doctrine had become a science. In James Luceno's Tarkin, the battle station is presented as a clandestine Imperial operation managed through remote installations, restricted circles of scientists and engineers, and tightly controlled access to information. On the surface, the Death Star was the Emperor's great project, but in practice, no one held the complete picture, and no base commander could view all the cargo manifests, schedules, or progress reports. Palpatine's visit to the site were rare and spaced out, and even the Imperial Council, which relayed his orders, was never quite sure how much of the plan had ever reached them in full. Millions of beings across the galaxy were involved in building it, each kept in the dark about where their contributions would end up. Wilf Tarkin, who commanded Sentinel Base and hundreds of guards and resupply outposts around the Bill site for 3 years, understood the shape of what he was looking at. The Imperial Security Bureau and Naval Intelligence worked constantly to smother rumors and close off leaks, and the continuous suppression of information formed a standing line item in the project's budget. Palpatine went further, using phantom projects and shell budgets to hide the real construction beyond official records. Inside that maze, another project was already taking shape, one almost no one in the Empire could even name. Palpatine had chosen this world with care. The statue in its underground citadel was older than the cultists who now lived there. It had been raised not by them or their ancestors, but by other people in another age, now long forgotten. For thousands of years, the mythology of the dark side had settled into the stone itself. No other religion had to be built on Exegol because one was already waiting within its walls. At the center of the citadel, his followers found the mountain. It held kyber crystal in quantities great enough to power weapons on a galactic scale. They began to cut into it. Slowly, beneath the long shadow of the storms above, the work began. At some point during the height of the Empire, Darth Vader himself went to see it. He did not go alone. He brought Uchi of Bastoon with him as an unwilling witness. After crossing the Red Honeycomb Zone, they reached Exegol and found the work already underway. The cultists and their enslaved laborers were building Star Destroyers by the hundreds, each one stronger than an Imperial warship and fitted with a cannon powered by kyber cut from the mountain beneath the temple. When the crystals were torn free, the released energy seared the skin from Ochi's skull and burned out his eyes. The cultists rebuilt him with replacements and fitted him with a cybernetic head unit to compensate for the damage. Even if he had spoken of what he saw, no one would have believed him. The cultists on Exegol called themselves the Sith Eternal. Their faces were obscured beneath deep hoods, robed figures who spent their lives in vaults that the rest of the galaxy did not know existed. The accounts of those who later stood among them described a population of true believers in the dark side of the Force, devoting every waking hour to the cause. Every routine task they performed was wrapped in ritual. The cultists were not always sure they were chanting alone. As they walked the vaults, voices rose on the names of Sith Lords long dead, Plagueis, Revan, names older still, and in the echoes, it sometimes sounded as though other voices, from the catacombs below, were answering back. As the reactor shaft opened beneath them, Palpatine reached for the dark side with everything he had and sent his consciousness across the void, towards the only place ever prepared to receive it. On Exegol, the cult had been waiting for this for decades. A body lay ready in the labs beneath the citadel, and then he arrived. But the moment came too soon. The hidden world had not finished its preparations. The body was unfinished, the procedures untested, the transfer succeeded, and the transfer failed. Palpatine was left trapped in a ruined, dying form, suspended above the citadel floor by an omen harness, old enough that even the cultists no longer remembered when its first version had been built. Tubes of regeneration fluid fed into his neck, preserving him a little longer with each pulse. The Sith Eternal worked with greater urgency. They spliced more genes and reinforced more tissue, but most of what they made did not survive. One strain cast lived and even flourished, raised within the Citadel as a son, though he grew up without power and was treated as a disappointment. The galaxy would later know him only as the father of Rey. The failed bodies in the vaults were the same fragility that would later appear in the fleet above, written first into flesh. Outside Exegol, the galaxy had decided the war was over. In a cantina somewhere on the rim, Lando Calrissian heard the same kind of whisper he had been chasing for years. He was searching for his daughter, taken by the First Order as a child, and the rumors he kept finding spoke of armies built not from clones or volunteers, but from children stolen and brainwashed into cannon fodder for a war that had not yet come. The signal was there. Nobody was positioned to listen for it. The New Republic had demilitarized. Planetary security forces had been returned to local authorities, and the standing fleet was much larger than the old Republic's judicials, but far smaller than the Imperial Starfleet it had just replaced. What intelligence apparatus remained had turned inward, picking apart Imperial warlord holdings in the core. Almost nobody was looking at the unknown regions. Lando's whispers reached people who could have understood. None believed in it strongly enough to act. In Exegol, 2 decades passed without sun or season, only lightning, ritual, and the quiet clang of work in the vaults. Children were raised beneath the surface of Exegol from birth. One of them would later stand on the bridge of an advanced Star Destroyer, having spent 20 years preparing for a single assignment, the command of the first ship to emerge into a wider galaxy. Around her stood officers raised on Exegol, officers from other unknown regions' worlds, and crimson-clad troopers conscripted as children and quietly culled into the roles by spies who identified their potential. There were thousands like them on Exegol. This was the true labor force behind the fleet. Not a payroll, but a congregation. Beyond Exegol, in galactic space, a separate supply chain kept the project fed. A Final Order general named Enric Pride, who would serve the Empire as a young officer and remain loyal to Palpatine in secret long after its fall, had quietly brokered a deal with the Corporate Sector Authority. The CSA, a galaxy-scale operation, was bankrolling the Imperial Remnant under orders that came from the highest level. The deal had been struck in a tent on a cold planet decades earlier, signed under the name Steadfast, the same word Pride would later watch painted on the hull of his command ship. The arrangement was fragile, liable to collapse over a single credit, yet while it held it, formed a distributed funding pipeline that reached deep into the galactic economy and fed the fleet without ever leaving its name on a document. From Exegol, ships moved through hidden spaceports in the unknown regions, where beings from 100 species labored without ever being told what they were building. It was the Death Star principle scaled down and pushed deeper into the void. Then, the galaxy heard a voice that should not have existed. Palpatine, or something bearing his voice, spoke again. Generations of hidden work had reached completion, and the moment the Sith had waited for had arrived. Within the Resistance, the intelligence officer Beaumont worked to interpret the ancient phrasing, tracing it to dark science, cloning, and older Sith practices. Inside the First Order, Kylo Ren followed the voice he had heard in his mind for most of his life. The Wayfinder was the only key. Long before the Empire fell, Palpatine had hidden 2 of these compass stones across the galaxy, each one carrying the route through the Red Honeycomb Zone. Without one, no ship could find Exegol. Kylo recovered his grandfather's Wayfinder on Mustafar and crossed the storm to reach the planet. For decades, no outsider had set foot on Exegol uninvited. The system had been built to refuse contact with the galaxy at every layer: navigation, supply, ideology, and biology. Kylo's arrival was the first breach, and it had not come through any of those layers. It had come through the Force, the one channel the secrecy doctrine could not block. The wall around Exegol had finally been crossed, and from this point forward, the system would never again be fully sealed. When he arrived at Exegol, the surface of the planet shook and split open. A metal hull striped with red erupted from the ground. Around it, more mountains broke apart, and more hulls emerged, each one a Star Destroyer comparable in scale to the Imperial warships of old, but each carrying an axial superlaser cannon powered by Kyber. A single giant obelisk rose with them, a navigation tower built to coordinate a synchronized ascension, its array unfurling like a metal flower as the rest of the fleet filled the atmosphere behind it. Inside the Citadel, Kylo Ren saw that the fleet above Exegol was the finished shape of Palpatine's return. To prove the threat, Palpatine ordered a single Star Destroyer to break from the fleet and destroy Kijimi. The cannon fired, and the planet collapsed into ice and molten stone, while the broadcast announcing the final order spread across known space. On worlds far from the unknown regions, the message arrived without warning. In cantinas and command centers, in market squares and orbital stations, the same voice spoke from speakers that had not carried it in a generation. Some who heard it were old enough to remember the original Empire and froze where they stood. Others, born into the years of the New Republic, did not recognize the voice, but understood the tone. Within hours, survivors who had been off-world during the strike confirmed that Kijimi was gone, and that the Resistance and Ajan Kloss began plotting a course built around coordinates that had been recovered from a dying friend on Pasana. Every ship in the fleet carried the power to erase a world, and yet the fleet itself was not free. Exegol storms disoriented navigation so completely that the destroyers could not find their own way out of the atmosphere. To leave the planet at all, every vessel in the Armada had to follow a single guidance signal broadcast from a single tower planted beside the Citadel. That was the opening. A transport carrying Finn, Janna, and a strike team broke through the upper atmosphere riding the hull of a Resistance bomber, then peeled off as the larger ship engaged Pride's escorts. They landed on the dorsal spine of a rising Star Destroyer, where the navigation array had been mounted along the open deck. From there, mounted on Orbaks brought from the moon of Kevbir, they crossed the hull under fire from Sith troopers and reached the cluster of conduits that fed the beacon. A ground team reached the tower and destroyed it. The signal that bound the fleet together cut out at once, and across Exegol, Star Destroyers dropped into standby and hung motionless above the storm. Thousands of warships suspended on a signal that no longer existed. Pride tried to recover control by routing the signal through his own command ship. By then, the sky over Exegol was filled with vessels that should never have been able to find the planet at all. What had changed the calculus was not the Resistance fighters that had crossed the Red Honeycomb Zone in the first wave. It was the second wave, the one no model in the Final Order's commands had accounted for. In the hours before the battle, Lando Calrissian had taken the Falcon out across the galaxy and called in every debt and favor he had built up over 4 decades of trying. The reply came in numbers nobody could have forecast. Freighters from the Outer Rim, mining haulers retrofitted with surplus turrets, private yachts with hunting rifles welded to their nose cones, a civilian craft from worlds whose populations had spent 40 years quietly hating the Empire's memory. They came down through the storm in a single uneven line, stretching past the horizon, and the Final Order's gunners did not have firing solutions for any of them. He understood what that meant. By moving the beacon onto the Steadfast, Pride was telling every Resistance pilot in the sky exactly which ship to aim at. The fleet was already lost. He kept giving the order anyway. Fighters and freighters arrived from every corner of the galaxy, and within minutes, the fleet that had been built in absolute secrecy was being torn apart by an armada of strangers. Star Destroyers collided in the upper atmosphere, the Kyber Mountain shuddered beneath the Citadel as the structure above it gave way, and the fleet that had taken a generation to assemble began to fall in a single afternoon. Below the surface, in the audience chamber where the Sith Eternal had gathered to witness their master's restoration, the chanting changed pitch. Robed figures who had spent decades in those vaults felt the floor shift beneath them as detonations from the surface rolled down through the stone. The apparatus that pumped fluid into Palpatine's neck began to falter as the chamber's power feeds collapsed one by one. Rey faced him at the foot of the altar, and the voices of every Jedi who had ever lived spoke through her in a single answering line. Poe watched the wreckage come down from the cockpit of his X-Wing. With it went the illusion that Palpatine's return had ever been inevitable. Somewhere under the collapsing stone and twisted metal, the omen harness that had held him in place had finally gone quiet. The cultists who survived the collapse scattered into the catacombs that ran beneath the citadel, and the strand casts in the cloning vats broke apart in their tanks as the climate system shut down. The Kyber Mountain, exposed for the first time in decades by the rupture of the chamber above it, glowed faintly under the lightning before the next quake brought a section of ceiling down across its summit. No accounting was ever made of the laborers who had been brought to Exegol against their will, or the officers raised from birth to cruise ships that no longer existed. Both halves of the design failed at the same time. Above, the fleet. Below, the body. Both collapsed in the same hour. The Resistance only walked through a door that had already been built into the design. The man who could not be found had built a world that could not save him. Everything on Exegol was built to make one man immortal, and it still ended in ruin. But the story of these ships doesn't end there. For all the warships the Empire built to control the galaxy, one worn-out freighter did more to save it than any of them. Watch the complete history of the Millennium Falcon next.